Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, Maggie, I think it's time for us to begin.
Okay. Are we ready?
I believe we are ready to go.
Okay, welcome everyone to our joint discussion about the Putnam Sisters Philanthropy, the gifts that keep on giving. Your docents today will be Allie Arnel, representing and talking about the paintings at the San Diego Museum of Art, and me, Maggi Crowell, representing and talking about the paintings in the Timken Museum. The Putnam family and the sisters, Amy, Irene, and Anne, all came to, San Diego in 1913 from Bennington, Vermont. Here in the center picture, you'll see the three sisters, Anne, Amy, and Irene, with their father, Albert. They were amazing collectors, patrons of the art, who contributed greatly to our culture here in San Diego. Irene died early in 1938, and so we'll be talking about her a little bit, but she died early in the giving history. In this tour, we'll be highlighting some of the paintings that they donated, ranging from 1934 to, 1938 to 1958. So that can be seen in both museums today. As we go along, we'll be revisiting the sisters' history so that we can learn a little bit more about them. We're going to start with one of the most iconic paintings in the San Diego Museum of Art by Giotto.
So take a look at this face. Notice the dark circles under the eyes. Notice the sunken cheeks and the gray hair and beard. This looks to be an older gentleman, perhaps an older gentleman we might see on the streets of Florence in 1330. But this is actually God the Father. And prior to this time in the West, we would usually see God the Father being depicted as a symbol, a ray of light or a hand. But here, this artist, Giotto, has depicted God the Father as a human being, and not a big, muscular, young God, but instead an older gentleman, one that we can relate to. God the Father here is holding three symbols, one of which is the tree of life. And when we take a closer look at that tree of life, we can see that Giotto has created a sense of three-dimensional form here by using lights and darks, and also by putting little details of the leaves. It's as though there was a tree from Florence being depicted in this space. And Giotto was a pioneer. He was an early artist who early would depict the world around him in his art. Later, we would have the Renaissance, which was a rebirth and interest in Greek and Roman art, architecture, literature, and philosophy. But already Giotto is expressing this interest in bringing the world around him into the art, bringing our human world into the art. Notice the angels that are looking up at God the Father. And at this moment, he is so radiant. He's so bright. And they are shielding their eyes just like we would, just like human beings would. And so, two of them actually have colored glass that they're looking at God the Father with as well. Notice that Giotto uses lights and darks here, shadows, to create a sense of three-dimensional form in the faces and the bodies of these angels. So this work of art was purchased for the Fine Arts Gallery, which later becomes the San Diego Museum of Art, by the Putnam sisters in 1945. And this was an incredible moment because there are perhaps a handful of Giotto works of art in this country today. Most of them are on the walls in churches and places in Italy. So for us, for San Diegans to be able to see a work like this here in San Diego is an incredible gift that the Putnam sisters gave us. This is actually a fragment of a larger altarpiece, which was cut down about 100 years after it was made. And this altarpiece can still be seen today in Florence. Now, this fragment is just a tiny fragment of this larger altarpiece that tells just a part of the story. Let's go now to a larger fragment that tells most of the story.
And here we have the center panel of a three-part altarpiece, or a triptych, by Petrus Christus, The Death of the Virgin. And this is particularly unique because it shows three episodes of the same story in the one panel. The first episode is the Virgin Mary, knowing that her end is near, has asked all the apostles to come and say goodbye to her and be with her and kind of comfort her. And the second episode is she has died, and you can see that the angels are carrying her body and soul up to heaven. The third part of this story is outside the window on the right. Here comes St. Thomas. He's a little bit late, and when he gets there and he says, well, where's Mary? Well, she's already gone. She's gone up to heaven. Oh, I can't believe that. You remember that Thomas was the doubting Thomas. And he says, well, if she's actually up in heaven, please show me some proof. And here's the angel dropping down her rope belt for proof that she has been assumed. Now, I said this was the center panel. It's a very large center panel fragment of a three-panel altarpiece. Let's look at the wings. Here are the wings, a photograph of the whole thing. The wings on the left is St. John the Baptist, and on the right, your right, is St. Catherine. And of course, you'll notice the perspective lines, and they're there to illustrate somewhat, to illustrate the idea that Petrus Christus was one of the first Northern artists to use these perspective lines that were developed in Italy. But it's easier to see in the whole painting. Let's go back to that. And you can see here, he's used the tiles on the floor to guide his perspective, as well as the path on the right leads us way back in the distance, where he's also used aerial perspective, and the village in the way in the back is a light blue. Now this painting being so large, there was some doubt about whether it really was Petrus Christus. So in 1992 to 95, the museum did extensive work, extensive scientific work. Actually, it was done in New York, and using infrared reflectography and taking photographs of every inch and photographs of the charcoal underdrawing to prove that it was actually by Petrus Christus. And fortunately, we discovered that it was. And there's so few paintings that we're very, very lucky that it turned out to be by Petrus Christus. Another painting that we're going to look at now also had extensive scientific research.
Notice the jacket here. It's dark, it's black, and it adds to a kind of somberness to the mood of this painting. Well, Maggie's correct. This work of art did undergo scientific investigation, and it was discovered that this jacket was really purple. And so if you can imagine, instead of this black jacket, a purple jacket, that really does change the mood of the composition. Also, at that same time, it was discovered there was a line across the forehead of this gentleman. And some art historians believe that perhaps the artist Giorgione thought he might put a hat on this gentleman, but then chose not to. Notice the background here. Notice that you can actually see the brushwork. You can see the hand of the artist. And you can see that as well in the hair. And there's a softness between the background and the hair. Giorgione kind of rejected depicting forms with crisp lines. Instead, he had an evocative, painterly manner. And we can see that here very well. Also, what's really interesting is that all of the margins around this painting are clear, meaning that this painting was not cut down. This is what Giorgione meant us to see. And that's interesting because we are in the Renaissance now. We're in a time when we do see depictions of people who are not popes, who are not kings, portraits of everyday people, if you will. But often they're indicators of status, perhaps in the background, or perhaps something they're holding, a prop. For instance, look at something like this. This is also a work of art that was donated to the museum, the San Diego Museum of Art, by the Putnam sisters. And by the way, they saw this, a picture of this in New York, and they really admired this painting and wanted this specific painting for the museum. But here you can see in her dress, we get an indication of her status. We can tell by looking at her dress the exact time that this painting was made. We can also see that she has jewelry, she's wearing gloves. Gloves are an indicator of high status in Italy in this time period. So a story is being told to us. But here, Giorgione takes all of that away. And he is asking us to actually take our own life experience and experience the living presence of this sitter, and for us to tell the story. And that's a really modern approach to painting. And that is why some art historians call Giorgione one of the first modern masters. This painting is one of just a few that Giorgione made in his lifetime. Giorgione painted in Venice, and there are only 2 paintings we know of that were signed by him, and this is one of them that's signed on the back. So it's an incredible work of art that we, again, because of the generosity of the Putnams, were able to experience. Well, a painting like this takes us on a journey in our mind, but we're here in Venice, and let's stay in Venice for a little while longer.
Here we're looking at Paolo Veronese, and he is definitely the decorator of Venetian Renaissance because of his unusually large, luxurious, complicated, colorful compositions. It doesn't matter if he was commissioned to do a portrait, a religious painting, a history painting, a mythology painting. They all came out very special, peopled with all the beautiful people of Venice and dressed beautifully. What you see here is the Madonna and Child with Saint Elizabeth, the Madonna's kinsman or sister, and her son, Saint John the Baptist, and Saint Catherine. And we can tell who all these people are because of their attributes. Saint Catherine is leaning with her knee on the hub of a wheel, which is the item of her martyrdom. And Saint John the Baptist wore a fur outfit when he was an adult as a hermit. But here, as a child, he's wearing a very fancy silk-lined fur, which is so typical of Veronese. Now, Veronese has dressed Saint Catherine in very, very special materials and beautiful fabrics that were actually made in Venice. Notice the striped sleeve in our painting, and look at the other painting by Veronese, not in our gallery, but the entire dress is made of exactly the same fabric. And since I'm talking about fabric, these paintings were early oil paintings on canvas because canvas was readily available in Venice due to the flourishing shipbuilding and the weaving of canvas sails. And so they were a much better support to paint on than wood or walls because of the high humidity in Venice. Things would have gotten moldy. So a great number of Veronese's paintings are still exactly where they were painted. So if you're lucky enough to get to go to Venice, you can walk around the town and see where they actually were painted for. However, our next painting that Allie's going to talk about really went on a long trip.
Yes, and first let's see what kind of trip we can go on just looking at this painting. Because if you look at these ordinary fruits and vegetables, we have a quince. That is not an apple, that's a quince. And then a cabbage, a melon, and a cucumber. And it is actually, they seem to be in a perfect curve coming into our space. And in fact, if there was another fruit or vegetable here, it would drop right on the ground in front of us. And Maggie is right. This painting has had quite a journey. It was painted by Juan Sanchez Cotan in 1602. And then about a year later, he gave this painting up and all his other worldly goods up and joined a Carthusian monastery. After some time, this painting found its way into the royal collection. And then about 200 years later, Joseph Bonaparte, the brother of Napoleon, took this work when he fled the city in 1813, and he eventually brought it to the United States, and it found its way to Philadelphia, where it ended up inspiring a whole nother generation of still life painters. So it has been on quite a journey. And here we can see realism and naturalism. Look at the seed here on the melon. It almost feels like it's sliding down this melon. It's a moment in time. And notice too how this black background is pushing all of these fruits and vegetables into our space. And there's a mystery here. We're really not sure why we have this composition as it is. But this is an early moment in still life painting in Spain. And this particular still life painting is considered one of the greatest, not only from Spain, but also in the European tradition. So this is an amazing work of art for us to be able to see here in San Diego. An important thing to remember about the Putnam sisters is that when they decided to purchase a work, they actually were shown pictures of the paintings, and sometimes the paintings in person if they were on loan temporarily to the museum. And then they would decide whether or not this was the type of painting that they wanted to buy for the Fine Arts Gallery that soon would become the San Diego Museum of Art. So these are ordinary fruits and vegetables. They don't have any symbolic meaning. I want us now to go to the work of an artist who also had an interest in common and ordinary things.
Here we see an ordinary painting of peasants. And peasants, their antics, their surroundings in all different seasons were particularly favorable to this artist, Peter Bruegel. This is a very large landscape, but it's also a religious painting, but it's a religious painting sort of hiding as a landscape. And you wouldn't know that unless you knew the title. The title is Parable of the Sower. So what's it about? It's actually like our first painting that has several episodes in one painting. In the foreground, you see the peasant or the farmer is spreading seeds. And if he throws the seeds on the path, the birds will get it right away, and that's not so good. If he throws the seeds in the stony area, the seeds won't grow any roots. And so that's no good either. But look back in the middle ground there near the little chapel, and you'll see there the seeds have met with very, very good ground, and you've got a flourishing crop. Now, the other thing I want to point out is over on the little beach over there, there's a group of people. We can see them a little bit better here in this detail. There's a bunch of people there on the beach, and they're actually all listening to a man standing in the prow of the boat. And that's Jesus actually telling this story that we see unfolding in the front. But what's it all mean? Well, the words of Jesus are the seeds, and the people are representing the soil. Some of the people there will listen and get the point. Others won't. If they're not ready to listen, they won't get the point. So it's a moral lesson about finding faith and salvation. This vast panoramic is not really very mathematically correct because we're going from, it's been stretched and extended by color. We're going from the very dark in the foreground to sort of a darkish green, and then the very, very light area in the back. And I wanted to mention that because Bruegel was actually working for a famous printmaker who sent him to France and Italy And the reason I mention that is he was sent 2 years before this painting was made. And on his way back and forth across the Alps, he did a whole lot of sketching. And that's uh, the influence of this particular landscape. So that's what we're seeing here is the Alps in the background. The Bruegel family of painters is extremely confusing because Peter Bruegel, the elder, had two sons who also painted, but they were only 4 years old and 1 year old when he died very early at 45. But they became painters and copied his paintings. So that has made somewhat of a confusion. And the other thing is all of the Bruegel family kept changing the spelling of their name. So when you do research on this artist, you get all kinds of confusion about who's who. This painting now can be seen over at the San Diego Museum of Art. It's been loaned over there while we're doing some construction, and you can see it up in Gallery 17. We have here an artist using ordinary people to tell a biblical story, and that happens with the same concept again in the next painting.
So when we look at this work of art by Zurbarán, we see a young woman and her child, and then another child, and she has a shawl around her neck. And that shawl is actually a textile from a certain region in Spain where this painting was made. And in fact, the women of that region would wear the shawl over both shoulders, as you see here. And we see her holding her child, and then right next to them is another child who has on fur. And that gives us an indicator of who he is. And I bet you remember from an earlier work that this is John the Baptist as a child. So John the Baptist is here, and this is the Virgin Mary and Jesus as well. So notice in the front of the composition on your left, there is a still life here. And here are apples. And apples do have a religious significance. They signify Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and their expulsion. But notice too what this artist is doing with this work. He is using a very soft color palette. We can actually see his brushwork in the background there. And this palette and the looser brushwork is an indicator of a later style of Zurbarán. By this time, Zurbarán, who had spent most of his life painting in Seville, has moved to Madrid. And it's believed he was exposed to the royal collection and to the ways of painting of other parts of Europe, including Northern Europe. And through that exposure, he learned to lighten his palette. He learned to create different types of underpainting and different types of compositions that were more intimate devotional compositions, as we see here. So this was really a shift in his style. This was donated to the Fine Arts Gallery, which again became the San Diego Museum of Art in 1935. And it was actually a gift of all three sisters, including Irene, who would later pass away. And this was one of several Zurbarán paintings that the sisters donated to the museum. Now you might be wondering, well, where did the money come from for the sisters to donate paintings to the museum? Well, in the 1927, all three sisters' father died, and they inherited about $280,000 from their father. And they did start to donate paintings to the museum in 1934, 1935. But then in 1938, they received an inheritance from their cousin of $5 million, was a significant amount of money at that time. And that was really a moment where they were able to even be more generous with the Fine Arts Gallery or the San Diego Museum of Art. So here, Zurbarán has created an intimate devotional composition where the viewer can actually see themselves in these people. Now let's go to a work of art where the composition does just the opposite.
Now keep in mind, while you're looking at this painting, that this was done almost the same time in art history as the painting that you just looked at by Zubran. And look how different. And why is it so different? It's different because it's a Russian Orthodox icon. And we need to have a reminder of a little bit of religious history to get this all straight. In the 11th century, the Catholic Church split in two. One part was the Eastern Orthodox Catholic, and their capital was in Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. And the other half was the Western Roman Catholic, with their capital in Rome. The Russian church was already well established as being an Eastern Orthodox church, and they had their Byzantine style already in place and using it. And so that's what you see here, is a Byzantine style that is more concerned about the humility and the holiness rather than the humanity. And the artists of these paintings are mostly monks, and they valued very much tradition and seldom signed their works. And here you have the sorrowful Virgin pointing the way, and that's often called the Hodegetria. And Jesus looks up at her and offers her a sheaf of wheat, a symbol of the bread that is used in the Holy Communion. Above the Christ child are Greek letters that say Jesus Christ, and above the Virgin Mary on the left, you have M for Mary or Mother, and on the right, you have Theta for God. It's very, very linear, and the focus is on the figures and their eyes and their hands. The figures, the poses, and the clothes all reinforce the idea of quietness or stasis. There's very little movement ever in these icons, except possibly with a hand gesture or so. The gold background set the icons apart from reality and the real time and space. And notice all the little holes in the back of this particular painting. We think that it was at one time covered with a decorative metal cover that would be called an oclad. The Russian icons collection in the Timken Museum is rather unique and sort of an independent part of the Putnam collection. Amy was extremely interested in anything Russian. She collected over 300 Russian icons over several decades. The 30 or so icons that are now displayed are in a special gallery, and their gold backgrounds glow against a green velvet wall covering that was made especially for these icons in Italy. This icon was purchased in 1956 in New York City, and it's the only painting that the Putnam sisters displayed in their home. It was over the fireplace in the den. There are many other smaller icons were in the house and were lined up upstairs in the hallway gallery. The icon painters had a definite goal in mind, and that is contemplation. Our next artist also had an important goal.
So notice the elements of power in this painting. This is Queen Henrietta Maria of England, and notice behind her right arm, there is a crown on the table. And this beautiful sumptuous gown of silk also expresses power. And we can imagine actually how she might sound if she were walking through a room at this moment. And the jewels she is wearing are very important as well. They will become very famous in time. The purpose of this painting is to show power. And works of art like this would have been given to other folks in England who were supporting her and her husband. Notice the beautiful composition here. We look initially at the face, right? This white face against this dark background. And notice how the artist Van Dyck has made our eye move around the composition by following the white of the gown, the white of the hand. And then it picks up again with this hand and moves us back up to the most important part of the painting, which is the face. Now, Amy and Anne Putnam first saw this painting in New York City. They were there in 1939 for the World Fair, and they were in a gallery and they saw this painting and they were so entranced, they bought it on the spot and bought it to give to the Fine Arts Gallery or the San Diego Museum of Art. And this painting was brought to San Diego, it was wrapped, and then it was put on the stairs of the San Diego Museum of Art on Christmas Day. And it was brought into the museum, unwrapped, and exhibited for a special Christmas Day exhibition. And so we get a real sense of the taste of Amy and Anne here. We can really understand what they admired in works of art, such as this. Well, this work of art was meant for an elite audience. It was commissioned for an elite client. Now let's look at a work that was actually made for the open market for people perhaps of the middle class.
Here we have a small, only 10 by 10 painting by Gabriel Metsu, a girl receiving a letter. But let's talk about this open market first. This is the first time in Western art history that painters decided to just paint what they want and hope to sell it. And so they would just sell it from storefronts or fairs or parks, anywhere they might, on a Sunday, anywhere they might be. Of course, they also sold from their studio. And this was because 10 years before this time, Holland became a republic, mostly Protestant Calvinist. And the new Dutch Republic was the richest city in the new Dutch Republic was the richest country in all of Europe because of all their science, their banking, their agriculture, their navigation inventions, and their shipbuilding. And all this was largely caused by hardworking middle-class people. So they were really proud of themselves and they wanted paintings of themselves for their houses. Metsu was a very popular painter. And in fact, his paintings were selling for much more than Vermeer's. In fact, there's a anecdote that one seller was called his painting a Metsu in order to sell it instead of calling it a Vermeer. The composition is interestingly organized. Notice the letter that the servant is delivering is outlined by his black hat. And I also want you to notice the red rose. We're going to see that in a second. And it's also thought that this girl is possibly Metsu's future wife, Isabel. Now let's look at a partner picture that I wish we had in the Timken, but it's definitely a partner. Same size, painted at the same time, and they certainly do fit together. And we have lots of things here to compare and contrast. We have the outdoors scene and an indoor scene. We have a man writing with the woman servant and the woman receiving the letter with the manservant. We have the more formal woman situation and the more casual man. And notice the red flower that's wilting at the top of the armoire. Is that the same flower that was in this vase over here? We don't really know. The theme of letter writing was so popular during this time because there was such a high literacy rate that there were even books written about how to write letters, romantic letters to each other. Very little is known about Metsu's life. He was raised a Catholic by a single mother, and no record of his training is in any of the documents, but he was described as a painter when he was only 14 or 15 years old. And 4 years later, when he was 20, he was listed in the Guild of Painters of St. Luke in Leiden. He died young, only 38 years old. Now, the Putnam sisters purchased this painting that you're seeing on the right from the Wildenstein Gallery in New York City in 1958, and it was painted in 1658, so exactly 300 years later. Also, it was purchased the same year as Amy died. I don't have the research on when she actually, the month she died or the month this painting was purchased, but it might have been the last one she painted. Metsu is very skilled at storytelling, and so is our next artist.
And the story starts here with the hands of this person. So notice how he is praying, but he is praying with his hands so tightly clasped that you can see his muscles are showing in his arms. His veins almost appear to be popping. This is St. Peter, and we know that because he has the keys to the kingdom of heaven on his arm, and that is his symbol or attribute. And at this moment, he is so distressed. And he is so distressed because he has denied Christ 3 times. Christ, of course, Jesus Christ of the Christian religion, who has told him he would do so, and he has. And so he is very, very upset. But in the distance, we see the rest of the story. We see an angel, and we see a young woman here. And we know this is Mary Magdalene because she is holding an ointment jar, which is her symbol, it's her attribute. And she is coming to tell St. Peter that Christ has risen from the dead and that all is forgiven as it is believed in the Christian faith. And so here, this is a wonderful painting because El Greco, who was actually born in Crete and trained in Venice and then spent the rest of his life painting in Spain, painted St. Peter at least 6 times. And this is considered to be one of the best of those paintings. And what's also wonderful about this painting is that we can see really the El Greco's work at the height of his career. So this is a devotional painting of his that was made at the height of his career. And so there are things here that we can see and recognize when we go out to other museums and look at El Greco works. For instance, here we can see the kind of active brushwork that he probably started to do in Venice, right? And we saw that active brushwork when we were thinking about Giorgione's Portrait of a Man. And here we're seeing it again. And also, we notice this elongated figure, this kind of long neck here, and this elongated figure, which is something we often see in El Greco's works. And finally, this incredible ethereal lighting. And so he seems to be lit from the front, from the top, from the back. There's lighting here in the back. There's a liberal use of white, which is very unusual. White is a very hard color to kind of contain in a painting, and he does it so well. He uses it throughout to convey this kind of ethereal lighting. When we take a little bit closer look at St. Peter, again, we can see that wonderful brushwork that El Greco has been known for. We see it throughout his beard and his hair. And not only there, you can see it as well in the depiction of his garments. And also we notice that here, when we look at the eyes of St. Peter, we can see that he almost appears to be crying. So he is so emotional in this moment. And El Greco is conveying the whole story here. And in this moment, if people from this time period would have looked at this painting and they would have understood the story and they would have understood the pain that St. Peter is feeling. So we get that message. We understand that message even today when we look at this work of art. We're going to look at another saint, and I wonder what the message is he's trying to convey.
Doesn't it look like he's just saying, listen to me, people, please listen to me. This is the most wonderful portrait by Rembrandt of Saint Bartholomew. Little is known about St. Bartholomew. He's only mentioned very briefly in the New Testament as one of the apostles. He's leaning forward here on sort of a low-backed bench. He has his one eyebrow cocked, and his mouth is slightly open. And he's possibly just talking to a group of people in his many travels, which were in Asia, India, and Armenia. The light, which highlights his face and his hands, which holds the knife almost casually, but that's the attribute of his martyrdom. He was flayed alive and then beheaded. Rembrandt has picked a middle-aged model with a rugged face, possibly one of his neighbors. He drew all of his biblical characters were people that lived around him in Amsterdam. He didn't make them idealized heroes, but made them men and women who were full of passion and belief. And this is all the more amazing because he has used so few colors. We have just a little bit of dark brown, beige, and then that wonderful light. And notice the sculptural aspects of his face, and then almost like a palette knife brushstrokes on his cuff, hand, and knife. Now here's kind of a mystery. This was painted in 1657 toward the end, not the complete end of his career, but toward the end of his career. And at the same time, he did quite a few other saints. He did Saint Simon, Saint James, Saint Paul, and a couple of more Saint Bartholomew's. And why in the world was he painting religious saints in Protestant Amsterdam when he was having financial problems and was also having problems with the Reformed Church? So did he paint them for the open market, or did someone commission them? And who would? And this is all something we'll never know. Rembrandt's religious beliefs were also unknown. He was raised a Protestant, but his family's sympathies went more, not for so much for the Calvinists, but for Remonstrants. But he didn't join that congregation either. We'll never know exactly what his feelings were, but he was very, very friendly with and accepted commissions from people of many religions in Amsterdam. Our next artist valued truthfulness to the nth degree.
And we can see that in this portrait of a very important person. Look at his face. So when we look at this face, we can see that Goya, the artist here, chose not to idealize this person. Instead, he painted him as he must have really looked. And we get that sense with the way his eye on our right is maybe a little bit droopy, and even around his mouth as well. And we also, though, get the sense of who this person was on the inside, right? We really are getting a psychological portrait as well. And there is a strength of character that we see in those eyes. And there is, he looks at us perhaps as though we're disturbing him, we've interrupted him. He does not look at us as though we are welcome. And it may be that this is who he was on the inside, and that is how Goya saw him. But there's more going on here. I don't have to tell you that this is an important person, and the Duca de la Roca was very important in Spain. But we get that sense with the way he is dressed, with the medals on his chest, with what he's seated on, the chair he is seated on, his expression. By the way, notice how Goya has made us continually look at his eyes, the way the hair is pointing right to his eyes. And also notice that there's more he's telling us here. Not only is that he's an important person, but that he's an intellectual. So we get the light on his forehead, expressing enlightenment, expressing an intellectual nature. We get the sense that he's been reading, So that is also an aspect of his character. So there's a lot that's being told to us about this individual by Goya. Notice too, what he's done here again with the composition, amazing. You can see there is a lightness here on your left, and that is a pentimento. That means that was painting that was originally painted and then covered up, and a different choice was made by Goya. And you can see now that he's moved this arm over here, which really is an excellent choice for composition, because now his finger is pointing down here to this arm, pulling us up again. And again, we're moving right in this direction, back up to the most important part of the composition, the face. But what's interesting here is that Goya is balancing the ambitions of the sitter to show his status, and that is very clearly being shown here, and Goya's own ambitions as a painter. And let me show you what I mean by that. So here you have the medals that this gentleman is wearing. And the most important of these three is this one. This is the Order of the Golden Fleece. And it is one of the most important medals that one can receive in Spain. And here, what Goya has done, this is supposed to be a lamb. He's actually painted it with little dots of paint, just really expressive dabs of paint. So taking the most important medal on this person's chest and turned it into a kind of a beautiful depiction of paint itself. And we see that kind of more expressionist painting, impressionist type painting all throughout here. And Goya was inspired by artists who came before him in Spain, and his work would inspire future artists as well, this painterly aspect to his work. Now, Goya painted for several rulers of Spain, and he was also very politically conscious, and some of his painting reflected that as well. I'd like to take you now to the work of an artist who was also very politically conscious and who was also a survivor.
Let me introduce you to Cooper Penrose of Cork, Ireland. I don't imagine you've ever heard of him, but the painting is by Jacques-Louis David, who I'm sure you have heard of. More than any other artist around this time in France, David was very deeply involved in politics, the French Revolution, and with Napoleon. He was mostly famous for large historic and classical paintings, but he also excelled in portraiture. In 1802, when this portrait was painted, he was experimenting with a new kind of portraiture, and at this time, he was painting on just, I'm sorry, I've gotten confused here. In 1802, when this was painted, Penrose had made his fortune in lumbering, cork glass, and Waterford crystal, which I'm sure you've heard of also. And at this time also, it was relatively quiet in Paris. And so people were visiting again to see what Napoleon had brought back. Penrose's niece was a student of David's and got him the introduction. Although David was very busy with royal commissions, they seemed to get along, so he agreed to do his portrait. Now, I started to say before that this was the time that David was concentrating on what would be called his knee-length portraiture. In these, he used a totally neutral background, no props, and often only a chair. Since Penrose was a Quaker, he didn't want anything fancy. Actually, there's absolutely no shiny buttons, nothing glitzy. The only small amount of glint is the nail heads in the chair. The space, which is often commented on by visitors to the Timken, actually creates a very natural impression, as if you were just walking into the studio and seeing Mr. Penrose sitting there in the chair. And these are rather elusive things that I'm going to mention to you, but the space and then the hands. Notice that his left hand is rather loose, but his right hand is somewhat animated, as if he's about to say something. And then his alert eyes that you can see in the detail, his raised eyebrows, and the wry expression on his face make him look like he has just said some sort of an interesting quip. And his active hand sort of adds to that. It's such a wonderful portrait to me, and I would love to have a conversation with him. And the first thing I would ask him is, did you like the portrait?
I think he would say yes. I think he would say he does like the portrait. I would love to meet him as well. He looks like a very interesting person. Well, we hope that you've enjoyed just seeing just a few of the works that Anne and Amy Putnam donated to both the San Diego Museum of Art and the Timken Museum of Art. And we hope that you will, these are just a few of many, many works that they donated. And we hope that you will come and visit the museums. The San Diego Museum of Art is open now, and the Timken Museum should be open sometime this fall. And explore the works donated by the Putnam sisters. And we hope that when you have a chance to see them in person, that you will be inspired, just as generations of San Diegans have been inspired looking at them through the years, all thanks to the generosity of Anne and Amy Putnam. So thank you so much for your time and attention. And we would be happy to answer any questions that you have. And I wonder, Emily, if we have any questions in the chat.
Yes, so we do have some questions actually from Facebook, and I see a hand, so I'll get to Renato in just a second. But our first question from Bob on Facebook is asking about the Putnams and what might be the benefit for them to donating the art versus selling it, if you guys, kind of had an idea about that.
So I think one of the benefits, I think they really were interested in bettering the community of San Diego and giving the community of San Diego a gift. I really think that's true. They were doing that very early, even before they had the large inheritance. And of course, part of the second inheritance, the larger one, the $5 million inheritance, there was, as part of that trust, there was a condition that there be charitable giving with that. And of course, charitable giving gave tax benefits as well. But truly, if you look at the history of the Putnams and how interested they were in the art and in continuing to give art to the community, truly, I believe they wanted to benefit our San Diego community, and they really have. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. And then I believe Renato has a question. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask.
First of all, thank you so much, Allie and Maggie. That was really, really a wonderful, illuminating tour. I have a funny question, and that is that it is quite obvious that these two sisters were such an incredible people that wanted to dedicate so much money and wealth to the rest of the community by giving these paintings. We also know that there is this difficult moment in the history of our museum and the Timken, but that didn't end up too bad because we ended up with two absolutely fabulous museums. But was there in that darker period some effort to try and get these sisters enrolled again? I mean, obviously there was some bad feelings at some point that were never healed.
Well, after about 15 years of generous gifts to what some people might not be aware of what happened. So I'll back up just a little bit to say that after about 15 years of generous gifts to the San Diego Museum of Art, there were some differences of opinion that arose between the Putnam sisters and the museum's administration over collecting and exhibition strategies. And so at that point, the sisters decided that their interests could be better served by lending their new acquisitions to other museums all over the country, actually. And ultimately, they established their own gallery, the Timken Museum of Art. So that is what happened. And I think that the that what we know, and of course we don't know all the details of conversations between the administration of the museum and the Putnams, but that was the direction that the Putnams wanted to go in. And there was, once the Timken Museum was founded, actually the San Diego Museum of Art was a great supporter of the Timken Museum. We actually loaned many of the paintings that the Putnam sisters had given the San Diego Museum of Art to the Timken Museum once they opened. And then every year, one of those paintings would be brought back to the San Diego Museum of Art. So it took, I think the last one that came back to the San Diego Museum of Art that was loaned by them to the Timken Museum came back in 1980. So, really, actually, we all benefited by having another museum here in San Diego, because now we have two great institutions and two great staffs and docents that are really excited about these works of art. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Renato. I see one other question. I think we have about time maybe for one or two more, but the other question I see in the chat is from Deborah, asking if the San Diego Museum of Art has ever done an exhibit specific just to the Putnam donations, if that's ever happened in the museum.
yeah, I'm not sure if that has or hasn't happened.
I don't think so.
I think it would be amazing, right? Wouldn't it be amazing for that to happen?
We've had one. I gave a talk about in the San Diego Museum of Art, pairing those donations with the ones in the Timkens, because there are two Veroneses, two Inneses, although the Inneses were in the American collection and weren't donated by the Timken, by the Putnam sisters, but there are correlations between the two museums that make that an interesting tour.
Yeah, I think it would be awesome. I think really honestly, right? Wouldn't it be awesome if both the San Diego Museum of Art and the Timken at the same time period exhibited their works, had a special exhibition of the Putnam sisters' works. I think it would be so enlightening, because once you start kind of going through the collection to see what the Putnam sisters donated to the San Diego Museum of Art and then again to the Timken, it's just kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah,
all the
really,
incredible works that they donated.
It really is amazing.
Yeah. And, even though, this virtual format is a little bit different, we can do things like this today where we can have something like that, where we kind of compare the two works. So I think it's a really, fantastic opportunity, and maybe, hopefully someday that can happen in person. But I think, having this ability here has been really enlightening. I think, everyone is saying thank you in the chat. So of course, thank you to Maggie and Allie, and a big round of applause. Does anyone else have any last questions? Maybe from Facebook as well, if you want to chime in there.
I might mention to Renato the John Marchiari catalog, the San Diego catalog written by John Marchiari, has a wonderful opening chapter about the two museums and
Right, so
their giving and back and forth. It's really a great chapter. He's done a lot of research on that.
right.
So you might read that.
Well, I want to just thank everybody so much for your time and attention. This was really fun and a little bit nerve-wracking, because we both knew that there were going to be a lot of docents on today. But it was so enjoyable to spend this time with Maggie exploring these works, and we really appreciate your time and attention. So thank you so much for joining us.
And we did it at 3 minutes apiece each.
I know. That was the one thing, because we wanted to show you as many works as we could. And there's so much we could have said about each work of art, but we wanted to make sure that we could show you as many as we could today. So we had to be short on every single work of art. We did it, Maggie.
Almost.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Thank you again. Big round of applause to Maggie and Allie, and thank you to everyone who attended. We, invite you to check out other tours that San Diego Museum of Art or the Timken is going on. You can check both of the museum's respective websites for those. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and have a fantastic day.
Thank you. Thank you very much. See you next time.